He sat by the mess hall window at dawn coffee, cooling beside an old P-38 patch catching the light. A younger officer scoffed that real pilots never cut their engines, his laughter thin as the flag ropes clink outside. Jack didn't argue, he just turned the patch over once, metal thread glinting like a heartbeat, proof of a war won by restraint, not noise. Quiet men leave echoes too, and this one began with silence. Morning light spilled through the hangar's high windows, turning the dust to gold. Outside, the wind moved gently across the tarmac, whispering around the silent nose of a restored P-38. Jack Murphy stood beside it, hands resting on the cool aluminum skin, watching the reflection of the propeller tremble across his jacket. A mug of coffee steamed beside a toolbox, the air thick with the faint sweetness of fuel and metal. Footsteps echoed across the concrete. A young reporter stopped a few yards away, notebook tucked under his arm, microphone still in its plastic wrap. "Mr. Murphy." The old pilot nodded once. The reporter smiled nervously. "They say P-38 pilots sometimes cut their engines mid-dogfight." "That true?" Jack studied him, the question hanging there between them. He looked back at the plane, the twin booms stretching like memories into the light. "Depends what you call a fight," he said. The reporter blinked. "I mean, isn't that giving up?" Jack's mouth curved not quite a smile. "You ever tried listening to the sky?" The younger man laughed softly. "I usually just take the noise for granted." "Most folks do," Jack answered. "Noise makes them feel brave." He took a sip of coffee, eyes fixed on the propeller. When the engines stop, you find out what courage really sounds like. The hangar grew quiet again, filled only with the tick of cooling metal. For a long moment, the reporter didn't write anything. The silence felt too alive to interrupt. Jack reached out, fingers grazing the throttle lever through the open cockpit window, the same motion he had made 1,000 times, the same one that had once decided life or death. He let his hand fall back, and in that small gesture lay a memory that still breathed. "You quit. Mid-battle." The reporter pressed his voice, uncertain now. Jack turned toward him, eyes steady. "No," he said. "I just stopped letting the engine do the thinking." The young man hesitated, pen trembling slightly above the page. Out on the field, a gust of wind rolled a tumble of leaves across the concrete, and both men watched them spiral, then fall still. Jack spoke again, quieter. "Back then we thought speed was everything. But sometimes silence is faster." The reporter finally scribbled a note, his face shifting from doubt to wonder. The old pilot's voice had the grain of radio static, each word steady, as if timed to the heartbeat of the plane itself. He looked once more at the reflection of the propeller, frozen now perfectly still. And something in his expression suggested that motion wasn't the only way to move forward. He'd once trusted silence more than speed. The canteen smelled of burnt toast and old jet fuel. A radio on the counter kept fading in and out, the same wartime broadcast looping like a ghost that refused to rest. A handful of veterans sat at the corner table, their coffee cooling between long pauses in conversation. Sunlight caught the silver edge of a patch on Jack Murphy's shoulder, its colors dulled by time but still catching the eye. Evan Reed slid into the chair across from him, notebook already open. "You really cut power," he began, "against faster enemies." Jack looked up, his expression calm, patient. "That's right." Evan laughed, quick and unsure. "Sir, with respect, that sounds crazy. Speed wins fights." Jack set down his cup. "Speed wins races," he said, voice steady. "Fights are about choices." The radio crackled, spitting out a headline from another decade. Someone behind the counter turned it down, but the static stayed soft, persistent. "Come on," Evan pushed. "They had you outmatched, outgunned, and you just pulled back." A few of the older men nearby turned to listen. One of them grinned, shaking his head. Jack leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to be heard without raising his voice. "Faster isn't smarter when speed outruns judgment." The words landed hard in the quiet. The younger man blinked, pen frozen midair. "You saying you could think clearer than them?" Jack smiled, faint but certain. "No, I'm saying I had time to think at all." Laughter rippled from another table, half in jest, half in respect. "Guy's got a point," one of the vets muttered. Evan tried to laugh along, but it came out nervous, a sound that didn't belong in the old hangar's air. He pointed toward the patch on Jack's shoulder. "That one from the squadron that did it first." Jack brushed the dust from its edge, eyes drifting somewhere else. "This patch," he said softly. "It isn't decoration." He turned it toward the light. "It's proof that we came back." For a moment nobody spoke. The radio hissed again, a ghostly breath between frequencies. The laughter faded into that static, swallowed whole. Evan looked around at the quiet tables. "Guess you all believed in different rules." Jack shook his head. "No, we believed in finishing the mission, just found a quieter way to do it." Outside, a training plane took off its engine, roaring across the sky. Every head in the canteen turned toward the sound, every pair of eyes following the climb until the noise faded. Then the silence returned, deeper than before. Jack reached for his cup, the coffee now cold. "The noise gets all the attention," he said. "But silence gets you home." He tapped the edge of his patch once more. The gesture was small, almost reverent. The patch wasn't decoration, it was proof. The world tilted into blue and sunlight. Clouds rolled beneath the wings like a living sea, each wave bright enough to blind. Jack Murphy's hands gripped the controls of his P-38, the cockpit vibrating in a steady, nervous hum. Every dial quivered. Every breath came with the rhythm of the engine's roar. The sky looked endless, but it wasn't empty. Somewhere beyond the glare, someone else was waiting close enough that the air itself seemed to listen. His radio hissed. 2 bogeys at 10 o'clock, his wingman called. Fast. Jack saw nothing yet, only the trembling of the needle on his fuel gauge. He pressed the throttle forward, the plane leaping as if impatient. The harness dug into his shoulders, sweat slid behind his neck, his heart matched the tempo of the engine's fast, steady, louder. "Hold formation," came another voice. Jack wanted to obey. Discipline was everything up here. But the sky was alive, and the sound inside the cockpit pressed against his skull until thought itself began to shake. The clouds closed in, turning gold at the edges. He glimpsed the shadow of another aircraft, too quick, slicing through sunlight like a blade of light. It vanished, then reappeared, diving. His wingman shouted something lost to static. Jack's pulse surged. His gloved hand trembled over the throttle. The instinct screamed, "Push harder, faster, louder." He could feel the machine begging to climb, to fight back with noise. Yet something else older than training held him still. He glanced at the lever, at the way the sunlight hit the small worn mark where his fingers always rested. His father's words came back about cabs in Manhattan, about engines that burned out when you forced them too long. Machines had logic, so did mercy. Another shadow streaked across the glass, closer now, the radio filled with wind and fragments of panic. Jack's breath shortened. The vibration of the propellers became a drumbeat in his chest. He looked left, saw nothing. Looked right, and there it was, silver and sharp, the enemy cutting across his field of view. His hand tightened, ready to meet noise with noise, but he didn't pull. He couldn't. The engine's growl filled the cockpit like an argument that would never end. For a single heartbeat he hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. The world shrank to the circle of his instruments, to the trembling of his own breath, fogging the glass. The needles quivered. The horizon tilted. And in the echo of all that sound, he found the shape of silence waiting just one motion away. He could hear his heartbeat over the engine now. That meant the decision was close. He whispered to himself, "Not yet." Outside, the clouds swallowed him whole, blinding white. The gauges flickered. The roar climbed another note higher. He drew one breath deep and careful and placed his palm over the throttle. One more second of noise and he'd be gone. The clouds swallowed the world. White light bled through the canopy, washing color from everything but the trembling needles on the instrument panel. Jack Murphy's breath fogged the glass, the noise of his own heartbeat louder than the engines that still roared behind him. He couldn't see the horizon anymore, only a blur of brightness and the shape of a shadow flicking across it, too fast, too close. The enemy's engine screamed through the static of the air, its speed tearing sound itself apart. Jack gripped the control stick. Every reflex screamed, "Fight back, climb, turn, make noise." But the sky wasn't built for shouting. He felt the vibration of the engines through his boots, steady, defiant. He thought of the rule book, the one that said never under any condition should a pilot kill power in combat. That rule had saved men before. It had killed others, too. Protocol pinned him to procedure. He chose silence instead. His gloved hand slid forward, then back until it touched the throttle. The metal was warm, alive, almost trembling with him. He hesitated only long enough to hear the wind begging for sound. Then he pulled it all the way back. The roar fell apart. The engines coughed once, then died. For a second the universe held its breath. The P-38 dropped into pure silence. Only wind remained whispering around the canopy, brushing the fuselage with soft hands. The gauges wavered, the altimeter ticking down like a heartbeat, finding calm. And then he saw it. The silver blur of the enemy shot past his right wing, fast, furious, blind. It overshot and vanished into sunlight momentum, betraying instinct. In the sudden quiet, speed itself looked clumsy. Jack smiled without meaning to. He was faster, he murmured. I was quieter, and the sky did the math. The wind filled the cockpit like music, now a low hum that sounded almost kind. He counted the seconds before the engine could choke back to life, before gravity decided whether silence had been wisdom or suicide. His hand stayed on the throttle, steady as prayer. The altimeter spun. His teeth clenched. The plane shuddered, then steadied. He pushed the lever forward again, gentle, patient. The engines coughed, caught, and the hum returned soft as forgiveness. Below, the clouds broke apart, revealing the coastline in pale light. He leveled off, the sea glittering beneath him like a second chance. Restraint, he whispered. That's all it was. He didn't see the other pilot again. Maybe the man survived. Maybe not. Either way, the sky had made its judgment. When he landed hours later, the mechanics came running, shouting, laughing, asking how he'd lived. He told them the truth. He'd turned off the engines. They didn't believe him. Nobody did. Back on the ground, nobody believed a quiet win. The airfield smelled of popcorn and oil. Flags snapped in the breeze, rows of folding chairs shimmered under late-morning heat. Memorial Day banners hung along the chain-link fence, their edges lifting in rhythm with the hum of engines warming up on the runway. Evan Reed adjusted his headset inside the temporary radio booth, a narrow glass box parked beside the tarmac. Through the window he could see families gathering, kids on shoulders, veterans in pressed jackets, one hand raised to shield their eyes from the sun. Behind him, technicians moved like dancers among cables and microphones, each signal tested, each frequency tuned. The crowd's chatter rippled through the static. At the edge of the field sat Jack Murphy in the shade of a maintenance tent, his cane hooked over a folding chair. His hat was tilted forward, hiding most of his face. The reflection of a P-38 flashed in his sunglasses as the announcer's voice came alive across the loudspeakers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 78th Annual Memorial Air Show, the announcer boomed. Today we honor those who served and those who taught the sky how to listen. Evan leaned toward the microphone. Broadcast check, he said. We're live. The crowd erupted as the first formation of jets swept past smoke-trailing red, white, and blue ribbons. Children clapped, adults cheered, and then the sound faded as the planes banked toward the horizon. A pause lingered, the kind that felt planned but wasn't. The announcer cleared his throat. Before our next flyover, a few words from someone who remembers the P-38. The monitor light blinked. Evan's voice trembled once, then steadied. This next story, he said, isn't about speed or firepower, it's about silence. The booth fell still. Outside, the crowd leaned closer. The sound of the generator blurred into the distance until all that remained was wind sliding across the microphone grill. Evan continued. Sergeant Jack Murphy flew one of these in '44, and when faster enemies closed in, he didn't push harder, he pulled back, cut his engines, let the sky decide. The audio cut briefly replaced by an old recording, faint, scratched, but clear enough to carry a truth older than most in the crowd. Jack's voice filled the airfield. He was faster, the voice said. I was quieter, and the sky did the math. For a moment, nobody moved. A child tugged his father's sleeve. Whispering, he turned off the plane. The man only nodded. Ask any P-38 pilot, the announcer added softly. Silence saved them, too. Applause began at the far end of the bleachers, cautious at first, then rolling forward like wind through wheat. Veterans rose from their chairs, hats pressed to hearts. Evan looked through the booth glass and saw Jack still seated under the tent staring up at the empty sky with a half smile. He didn't wave. He didn't stand. But when the crowd clapped louder, his head tilted slightly as if listening for something only he could hear. The next demonstration began two modern jets screaming overhead, leaving thunder in their wake. Children covered their ears. The applause turned to gasps. Yet, when the noise faded, the quiet that followed was deeper, almost holy. Evan lowered his mic and said quietly into the feed, "Sometimes the loudest lesson is quiet." The technicians didn't respond. They just nodded. Outside, a flag near the hangar rippled without wind, its motion slow, deliberate, as though remembering something. Jack stood cane in hand and turned toward the runway. His silhouette lined up with the P-38 display plane, glinting beyond the fence. For a second, the reflection made him look younger, a man caught between then and now, waiting for the engines to fall silent one last time. Evan watched him from the booth and finally understood. The story hadn't been about tactics or luck. It was about patience, the kind that saves, not conquers. Humility had won where noise never could. He turned off his microphone. The red on-air light faded to black. Jack lifted his hand once toward the horizon, a small salute to the day and to the silence that had followed him home. He had made peace with the sound of nothing. Evening settled over the hangar like a closing hymn. The last of the crowd had gone home, leaving behind folded chairs, paper cups, and the quiet hum of cooling metal. A soft trumpet played through the overhead speakers, something slow, something from another time. The light through the open hangar doors turned the dust to gold. Evan Reed walked across the floor, microphone still dangling from his hand, its cord tracing a line behind him, like a thought he wasn't ready to let go of. He stopped when he saw Jack Murphy standing near the museum display, reading the new plaque mounted beside the P-38's nose. P-38. Pilot's silence tactic. Engine cut evasion. Outsmarted faster enemies. The words caught the last sunlight and glowed faintly as though the metal itself remembered. Jack reached out and brushed a fingertip across the engraved letters. "Didn't think they'd make it sound so heroic," he said. Evan smiled. It was. Jack chuckled, the sound raspy but kind. "No, kid, it was practical. We just didn't want to die." The trumpet drifted into silence. Outside, the flag at half-mast fluttered. Once, then fell still again. Evan stepped closer, holding something in his hand. "You left this under your chair," he said, offering the old squadron patch. Jack looked down at it, blue and silver edges frayed, but the stitching still proud. The emblem had survived longer than some of the men who wore it. He took it carefully, thumb tracing the threadbare border. "This patch has more miles than I do," he murmured. "You could donate it," Evan suggested. "Put it next to the plaque." Jack studied him. "You sure the museum wants another relic?" "They want the story that comes with it," Evan said. "And that's you." Jack's eyes softened. "Then you take it." He pressed the patch into Evan's palm. The fabric was lighter than it looked, yet carried a weight that seemed to settle somewhere behind the heart. Evan hesitated. "I can't." "You can," Jack said quietly, "because you listened." They stood side by side, looking at the plane under its new lights. The metal shimmered in a mix of gray and gold, like a memory halfway between shadow and forgiveness. The radio in the corner clicked. A soft voice from the booth began the recap of the day's broadcast. Earlier this afternoon, a veteran spoke of cutting his engines mid-dogfight, of trusting silence where noise had failed. The sound faded with a static sigh, and the hangar filled again with stillness. Jack exhaled slowly, leaning on his cane. "Funny thing," he said, "I used to think silence was the hardest thing to live with." "And now?" Evan asked. Jack smiled. "Now it's the easiest." A breeze slipped through the open doors, stirring the flag and carrying the faint scent of rain. The sky outside was lavender and soft. Evan turned the patch over once in his hand, then looked back toward the plaque. The brass letters caught the last light steady and clear. He tucked the patch into his jacket pocket. "I'll take care of it," he said. Jack nodded. "That's all any of us ever did." They didn't speak for a while after that. The trumpet resumed a lonely note stretching into the rafters where the wind answered in a voice of its own. Evan finally broke the silence. What do you call that sound? When everything stops but nothing's missing. Jack thought for a moment. Home, he said. The younger man smiled, and for the first time that day, he understood. He reached over and switched off the radio. The click echoed once through the hangar, and the quiet that followed was not emptiness, but completion, like a final period after a long sentence that had taken a lifetime to write. The night settled in, carrying with it the hum of memory, the warmth of a lesson learned too late but never lost. He cut power so others could fly on.